There is a kind of man this country used to make more of. The kind who builds something real, keeps it quiet, and never once mistakes the size of his bank account for the measure of his worth. I know that kind of man because I am that kind of man. And I know what happens when someone looks at you and sees nothing worth respecting. I know exactly what they reveal about themselves in that moment. And I know how long a patient man can wait before the truth finally does what truth always does. My name is Walter Greer. I am 64 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house on a flat, tree-lined street in the Avondale neighborhood of Cincinnati, Ohio. The house has a covered front porch where I drink my coffee every morning at 5:45, rain or shine, 12 months a year. My neighbors know me as the man who keeps his gutters clean and always waves when he drives by. I drive a 2006 Ford F-150 that I bought used in 2011 with 47,000 miles on it. She has 214,000 miles on her now, and she starts every single morning without complaint. I consider that a form of loyalty, and I respect loyalty in all its forms. I wear what I've always worn. Work shirts in solid colors. Khaki pants from a mid-range department store. A pair of dark brown boots I've had for 9 years that have been resoled twice because a good boot does not need replacing. It needs maintaining. I learned that from my father, who learned it from his, and who both would have laughed out loud at the idea of spending $400 on footwear, just to tell a room full of strangers something about yourself. What my neighbors don't know, what the men at my Thursday morning Bible study don't know, what the young woman at the Kroger on Montgomery Road who always asks if I need help loading my groceries doesn't know, is that I own Greer Land Holdings, a private real estate investment company with commercial properties across 9 states, industrial parks, medical office buildings, a portfolio of triple-net leased retail centers, 2 extended-stay hotel properties in the Southeast, all of it held inside a quiet structure of LLCs and family trusts that my attorneys have kept clean and private for going on 23 years. You will not find my name on any public filing that a casual search would surface. No local magazine profiles, no charity gala programs with my photograph, no Chamber of Commerce awards on my wall. I have been deliberate about every single one of those absences. The portfolio is worth $340 million, give or take, depending on what the market is doing on any given Tuesday. And I drove to the Kroger this morning in my F-150 with a coupon for chicken thighs, and I would not change a single thing about that. I want to stop for a moment here and say something I believe with my whole chest. There is an entire generation of men and women in this country, people who built their businesses in the early mornings and late evenings, people who coached Little League, and served on church committees and showed up to their kids' school plays and never once posted a single thing on the internet about any of it, and those people are the actual backbone of this country. Nobody is making a podcast about them. Nobody is putting them on the cover of anything. But they are the reason whole communities still function. If you know someone like that, call them today. Tell them you see what they built, because those people almost never hear it, and they won't be around forever to hear it. Now let me tell you about my son. My son Darius is 36 years old, and he is, without exaggeration, the finest human being I have ever had the privilege of knowing up close. He has my late wife Connie's temperament, which is to say he is patient in a way that seems almost impossible for a man his age, and he is kind without making a performance of it. Connie passed 7 years ago from a stroke. She was 54 years old, and she had never been sick a day in her life before it happened. I still set 2 coffee cups out some mornings before I catch myself. Darius has her eyes. Same shape. Same particular way of looking at you that makes you feel like you are the only person in whatever room you're standing in. When Darius was 11 years old, he came home from school one afternoon and informed me very calmly that he had decided to start a neighborhood lawn service. He had already drafted a flyer on notebook paper and knocked on 6 doors. By the end of that summer, he had 14 regular customers and had saved enough to buy himself a used bicycle and a used guitar. I sat at this same kitchen table and thought, this kid is going to be all right. I was right about that. What I did not fully anticipate was who he was going to let into his life. 3 years ago, Darius brought home a woman named Serena Holloway Voss. I want to be fair. I want to give you the honest version, not the version filtered through a father's instincts, which can sometimes be more about the father than the person he's sizing up. So here is Serena Holloway Voss described as charitably as I can manage. She is 34 years old. She is well put together in the deliberate way that people who have thought very carefully about the impression they make tend to be well put together. She grew up wealthy on the north side of Columbus, went to a private school, did her undergraduate degree at Northwestern, and has mentioned all of that within the first 10 minutes of every single conversation I have ever had with her. She works as the vice president of marketing at a regional financial services firm, which is a real job at a real company. and I have no doubt she is good at it. What she is less good at, significantly less good at, is adjusting her behavior based on who is in the room and what they actually know about her. Within the first 15 minutes of meeting me, Serena had found a way to mention her firm's revenue, her subscription to a wine club that sources from small Burgundy producers, and a recent weekend she and Darius had spent at a boutique hotel in Asheville. She said Asheville the way people say Asheville when they want you to picture the hotel, not the city. I smiled. I offered her more sweet tea. I filed it away. I think most of us have met a Serena Holloway Voss somewhere along the road. A coworker, maybe, or somebody's spouse at a family function. And the mistake we make is writing those people off as simply shallow. They're not just shallow. They are showing you something real about themselves every time they reach for the next credential to lay on the table. They are showing you their fear. Serena Holloway Voss was afraid of being mistaken for ordinary, so she made absolutely certain that nobody in any room would make that mistake. At least, that was the plan. About 14 months ago, Darius and Serena got engaged. I was glad. I told Darius I was glad, and I meant it, because if Darius loved her, my job as his father was to make space for that love to be what it needed to be. I kept watching. I kept hoping. I kept filing things away. And then came the evening at my kitchen table that changed the direction of everything. They had come for Sunday dinner the way they did most weeks. Darius was out on the back porch making a phone call. It was just Serena and me at the table, and I was pouring us each a second cup of coffee, and she said, in the careful voice of a person who has decided to be very diplomatic about something they have already made up their mind about, "Walter, I've been thinking, and I hope you'll take this the right way, but we're starting to look at homes in Hyde Park, and the kind of neighborhood we're going for, it's a certain kind of community. And I just want to make sure that when people meet Darius's family, the impression is, consistent with where we're heading." She paused. She said, "I guess I'm just saying it might be worth thinking about the truck, maybe, and possibly updating some of your, presentation." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "I appreciate you looking out for the family, Serena." She nodded, relieved, already moving on in her head. I got up and refilled her coffee cup, and I thought about my father. I thought about the fact that he wore the same canvas work jacket for 11 winters, because it was a good jacket and it still had years left in it. And I thought about the very specific kind of person who looks at a quiet man and sees a problem to be managed. I did not say anything else about it that evening. I will tell you honestly that I sat with what she had said for a long time. Not because it hurt me. I am 64 years old and I have been Walter Greer for all 64 of those years, and I have never once needed anyone's opinion about my truck. I sat with it because of what it told me about the shape of things to come. And because my son with Connie's eyes and Connie's patience, deserved for me to be careful. Careful and precise. Not angry, not reactive. Precise. What I did not know yet, what I would not know for another 4 months, was that Serena had a plan. It always starts with a plan, doesn't it? The Holloway Voss family held what they called their annual family dinner in November. It was hosted by Serena's parents, Barrett and Lynn Holloway Voss, at their home in Upper Arlington, the kind of suburb of Columbus that has a particular relationship with itself. Large colonials set back from wide, clean streets, BMWs in the driveways. The kind of neighborhood that has a homeowners association newsletter with a guest columnist. Barrett Holloway Voss was a 68-year-old retired senior partner from a Columbus law firm. He was tall, loud in the specific way that men who spent 30 years winning arguments tend to be loud. And he carried himself with the relaxed authority of a man who had never once in his adult life stood in a room and wondered if he belonged there. He shook my hand the way men shake hands when they have already decided what category you belong in. Firm, brief, already moving on. Lynn was elegant in the polished, precisely assembled way of women who have spent decades performing a certain kind of life. She took both my hands in hers when we met and said, "Walter, we have been so looking forward to this." She said it warmly, sincerely, in exactly the way you say something you have rehearsed long enough that it sounds sincere. The house was everything the neighborhood had promised: high ceilings, built-in bookshelves in the sitting room filled with books arranged by spine color, which told me the books were decoration. Oil paintings that had been chosen to communicate rather than to move anyone. A dining table set so formally it looked like the inside of a magazine spread, which I suspected was partially the point. Darius was beside me through all of it. I could feel him paying attention to the room the way he has paid attention to rooms since he was small, quietly, without giving anything away. About 20 minutes in, while Darius had stepped away to use the restroom, I found myself standing near the window in the sitting room, with a glass of sparkling water, listening to Barrett tell a story about a legal case from 1998 that apparently established some principle of Ohio contract law. And during a pause in the story, Barrett said to me, "So Walter, what did you do before you retired?" He said before you retired with a small practice pause that told me he had already decided I was retired. I said real estate investment. Mostly commercial. He nodded in the way men nod when they are being polite about something they find unimpressive. Small stuff residential? I said no, commercial. Industrial, medical office, some retail, net lease. He said oh sure, and then pivoted back to his 1998 contract case. I smiled. I took a sip of sparkling water. I filed it away. Dinner was served in 3 courses, which felt like a statement. Barrett led the table the way men like Barrett always lead tables, from the head, with the confidence of a man who has been the loudest and most credentialed person in most rooms for a very long time. He talked about Preston's performance at a recent firm charity golf tournament. He talked about the neighborhood's property values. He talked about where certain people they knew were spending Christmas. And then he pivoted. He said, "Serena tells us you have a nice little property in Avondale, Walter. I know that neighborhood has been going through some changes." He said some changes the way people say things when they want you to know they are being diplomatic. I said, "I've lived there 21 years. I love it." He said, Of course. Lynn said to Darius with a smile that had a particular shape, "You two must be so excited about Hyde Park. Such a beautiful community, much more suitable for a family." I watched Darius's jaw tighten just slightly, the smallest thing. Only a father would have caught it. I picked up my water glass. I took a slow sip. I said nothing, because the folder had not yet appeared, and I knew with the particular certainty of a man who has been patient through many long games, that it was coming. I was right. It came with the dessert course. A chocolate torte that Lynn mentioned twice had been made by a local French-trained pastry chef, which told me the torte was also partly a statement. Barrett reached beneath his chair and produced a manila folder. He set it on the table. He smoothed the front of it once with the flat of his palm. He cleared his throat. He said, "Walter, we want to talk about something as a family. Something we think is a real opportunity." I looked at the folder. I did not reach for it. Serena's hands were folded on the table in the careful posture of someone trying to look neutral about something they helped orchestrate. Darius looked at me, quick, uncertain. Barrett said, "Darius has an opportunity here, a real one. He's been offered a chance to buy into a small regional chain of fitness centers as a founding partner. The numbers are strong, the growth potential is real. What he needs is startup capital, and what we are proposing, right here in this document, is a bridge arrangement. Darius's future inheritance, the assets you'll be passing along to him eventually, would serve as collateral for the initial round of private funding. It's fully legal. Our attorneys drew it up. Everything is above board." He paused. "We just need your blessing, Walter, as Darius's father." He leaned back. He looked at Lynn, who was composed. He looked at Serena, who was calm in the deliberate way of someone who has rehearsed the next several minutes. He looked at me with the expression of a man who did not think there was any serious question about how the next 5 minutes were going to go. I picked up the folder. I opened it. I read every page, every number, every signature line, every footnote written in the tight, confident language of a man who expects documents to win arguments for him. I took approximately 4 minutes to read it. The table was very quiet. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Then I closed the folder. I set it back on the table. I picked up my water glass. I took a long, unhurried sip, and I looked at Barrett Holloway Voss with the warmest smile I had. I said, "Barrett, I appreciate the thought you all put into this. I'll take it home and review it properly." Barrett exhaled. Lynn reached for her wine. Serena's shoulders dropped exactly 1 inch. They thought the hard part was over. I finished the torte. I made pleasant conversation for another 20 minutes. I complimented the lamb chops. I shook Barrett's hand at the door, a full, firm shake, and I held his eyes for exactly 1 second longer than was necessary. He didn't know what that second meant. He would. The valet, a college-aged kid in a black vest, brought the F-150 around with the expression of a man who had spent the last 2.5 hours reconsidering his assumptions about the vehicle he'd been asked to park. I tipped him generously. I watched his face change. I drove south on Route 315 and got on I-71 heading back toward Cincinnati. The highway was dark and mostly empty at that hour. The heater in the truck works fine. The radio picked up a late-night jazz station out of Columbus that faded in and out through Westerville, and then went quiet somewhere around London, Ohio, and I did not reach over to find something else. I just drove. I was very calm, the kind of calm that only comes from knowing exactly what you are about to do. Now here is what Barrett Holloway Voss did not know as he was rinsing that second wine glass in his Upper Arlington kitchen that night. Here is what Serena did not know. 22 years ago, I created a subsidiary of Greer Land Holdings called Meridian Fitness Properties, LLC. It is a dormant entity, structured and registered in Ohio, that I have maintained specifically because the fitness and wellness real estate sector had been on my long-term acquisition watch list. I had never activated it for a deal, but it exists. It has existed quietly in the architecture of my holding structure for 22 years, and the regional fitness center chain that Darius was being offered a partnership stake in, the one Barrett Holloway Voss and his attorneys had packaged into that Manila folder, was a chain called Fitmark Regional, with 7 locations across Ohio and Kentucky. Fitmark Regional's landlord, the entity that held the master leases on 4 of their 7 locations and had right of first refusal on a 5th, was Meridian Fitness Properties, LLC, my company. I had known this since the day Darius first mentioned the opportunity to me 3 months earlier, in the same casual way he mentioned most things, over the phone while he was driving home from work. He hadn't asked me to look into it, he'd just mentioned it. So I looked into it quietly, the way I look into everything, and I found what I found, and I sat with it, and I waited. Barrett Holloway Voss had built a folder full of legal language to impress a man he had already decided was a retired small-timer from a changing neighborhood. He had no idea that the man at his dinner table had been the silent infrastructure underneath the very deal he was pitching. I said nothing for 11 days. I went to my Thursday morning Bible study. I fixed a section of fence in my backyard that had been leaning since September. I called my college roommate Bernard in Atlanta, and we talked for an hour and a half about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. On day 5, Serena texted me. She wrote, "Hi Walter, just checking in to see if you'd had a chance to look over the proposal. Darius is so excited about this opportunity. We really think the timing is right." I waited 3 hours, then I wrote, "Still reviewing, Serena, these things deserve care." She sent back a smiley face. I put my phone down, then I made 2 calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Patricia Engel, who has handled Greer Land Holdings for 15 years. Who understood without any extended explanation that when I called her from my personal cell on a Tuesday evening, it was not a social call. I told her what I needed. She told me how long it would take. I said, "Take the time you need. Do it right." The second call was to the managing broker of Fitmark Regional's corporate office, a professional call, a landlord-tenant matter, specific, quiet, and completely within my rights as the entity holding those master leases. What those calls set in motion took 9 days to fully complete. On day 12, I drove to Columbus. I did not take the F-150. I took the car I keep in a garage 2 blocks from my house, a 2019 black Audi A6 that I use maybe 40 times a year for trips that call for it. The drive up I-71 takes about an hour and 40 minutes. I made it in an hour and 45 because I stopped for coffee at a rest stop outside Jeffersonville and I was not in a hurry. Patient men are almost never in a hurry. I wore a charcoal suit that morning, not one of the flashy ones. Just a good, well-cut charcoal suit that my tailor in Hyde Park, of all places, had made for me 8 years ago. Dark tie. My best shoes, the black Oxfords I have resoled 3 times because a good shoe doesn't need replacing. I parked in the Fitmark Regional corporate lot in Dublin, Ohio, in a space near the entrance. I walked into the building. Serena was there for what she believed was a scheduled meeting with Fitmark CEO and the investment group about finalizing the partnership terms. Barrett was there because Serena had asked him to be. He was in his full partner emeritus mode, cashmere sport coat, the confident posture of a man who expected to be the most important person in any room he walked into. There were 3 other people in the conference room when I entered. The Fitmark CEO, a man I had spoken to twice by phone and was meeting for the first time in person. My attorney Patricia Engel, who had driven up from Cincinnati that morning, and a representative from a private equity firm out of Indianapolis that held a minority stake in Meridian Fitness Properties and had been quietly part of this situation for 9 days. I walked in and sat down at the far end of the conference table. Barrett saw me first. His expression moved through surprise, then calibration, then the beginning of something else he didn't have words for yet. Serena's face went through the same progression, faster. I did not say anything immediately. I let the room settle. I let them look at the suit, at Patricia Engel, at the Indianapolis representative, at the documents already laid on the table. I let them begin to understand what kind of room they had walked into. Then I said very calmly, "Good morning. Why don't we all sit down? I want to stop here for a moment, the way I stopped to talk to you earlier, and say something directly. If you are a person who has ever been dismissed, if you have ever been managed, repackaged, or quietly told to update your presentation, so as not to embarrass somebody who thought they were going places, I want you to hear this. The most powerful response available to you in almost every situation is not the angry one. It is not the loud one. It is the one that is so thoroughly, so quietly prepared that when it arrives, there is no argument to have. There is only the truth on the table. And truth does not need you to raise your voice. It does not need you to perform. It just needs you to be patient long enough for it to do what it was always going to do. Barrett cleared his throat. He said, "Walter, I'm not sure I understand what's happening here." I said, "I know. Let me explain it," and I did. Clearly, precisely. The way you lay things out when you have had 12 days to decide exactly how you are going to say them. I told them about Greer Land Holdings, about its 23 years of operation, about Meridian Fitness Properties and the master leases on 4 of Fitmark's 7 locations. I told them that the proposed partnership investment that Barrett's attorneys had structured in that Manila folder, as it was currently written, would create a direct conflict with provisions in those leases, and that, as the landlord entity, I had certain rights regarding partnership changes in Fitmark's ownership structure that had not been disclosed in the deal documents, because Barrett's attorneys had not known to look for them. I told them that Patricia Engel had filed the appropriate notifications with the relevant parties 9 days ago, which was why this meeting, the one Serena thought was a finalization meeting, had actually been restructured as a preliminary review. Barrett's face had gone through several more phases during this. By the time I finished, he was looking at me with the expression of a man who has just discovered that the foundation of a building he was very confident about is significantly more complicated than the blueprints suggested. I said, "Barrett, I want to be clear about something. I am not here to block this deal. I am here because I was never consulted about it, despite the fact that my company's assets were being proposed as collateral in my son's name without my knowledge. And despite the fact that my company is materially connected to the underlying business your family has been positioning as an investment opportunity." Silence. "Now," I said, "if Darius genuinely wants to invest in Fitmark, that is a conversation I am glad to have. He is my son and I want him to build things. But that conversation is going to happen between him and me directly, with full information, with no collateral arrangements made on his behalf without his father at the table." Barrett said very quietly, "We were trying to help." I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "Barrett, I know you were, and I'm going to take you at your word on that. But help that comes without full information, and without the courtesy of talking to the man whose assets you were planning to use, is not actually help. I think you know that." He did not answer. Serena had not spoken since I sat down. She was looking at the table, not with the fixed composure of the woman who had asked me to update my presentation. She was looking at the table with the expression of a person who had just understood something about the size of a mistake they'd made. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. I said, "I'll be in touch with Patricia about the lease notifications. I'd recommend you speak with your own counsel about next steps on the deal structure." I paused at the door. I turned around. I said, "One more thing. That proposal you built around Darius's future inheritance." Patricia transferred Darius's inheritance protections into an irrevocable trust this week, in his name alone, accessible only with his signature. The inheritance you built the collateral structure around no longer exists in the form your documents describe. Please pass that along to your attorneys. I walked out into the November morning. The Audi was where I had left it. I drove back down I-71 to Cincinnati. The Jazz station was clearer on the way home. I stopped at the same rest stop and got another cup of coffee and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, watching a family of Canada geese walk across the grass median. And I thought about Connie, about how she would have laughed about the geese, about how she always laughed about things like that. She had a talent for finding the funny thing at the exact right moment. I missed that every day. I got back to Avondale in the early afternoon. I changed out of the suit. I put on my work shirt and my boots, and I went out to the backyard and turned over the soil in the garden bed, where Connie and I had planted knockout roses 20 years ago, and where I still put new roses in every spring. That evening Darius called me. He had gotten a call from Serena, who had gotten a call from Barrett, and the story had made its way to him the way stories make their way through families. Imperfect, out of order, missing pieces. He said, "Dad, I need to come over." I said, "I've got the kettle on." He was at my back door in 45 minutes. He let himself in the way he has since he was a teenager, through the back, without knocking. He found me at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee already poured, same as always. He sat down across from me. He looked at my face the way he has looked at my face since he was a small boy. Like he is reading something he knows by heart but is looking at closely anyway. I told him everything. From the beginning. The structure of Greer Land Holdings. The Meridian Fitness Properties leases. The moment I first heard him mention Fitmark on the phone 3 months ago. And what I found when I quietly looked into it. The dinner at Upper Arlington. What Barrett proposed. The 11 days of waiting. The morning in Dublin. The trust. When I finished, Darius did not speak for a while. He held his coffee with both hands and looked out the window at the dark backyard. Then he asked me something I had been carrying the answer to for a long time. He said, "Dad, why did you never tell me about all of it? The company, the portfolio. Why didn't I know? I looked down at my coffee. I looked out at the dark garden where Connie and I had put in the first roses 20 years ago, the year after we moved in. I looked back at my son. I said, because I wanted you to figure out who you were on your own. I wanted you to look at your father and see your father, not a portfolio. I wanted you to build your lawn route with 14 customers and feel what it feels like to build something from nothing, without a safety net underneath you that you could see. I wanted you to know you were capable before you knew what I had. Because Darius, I promise you this. The knowing changes things. And I wanted you to be who you already are before it had a chance to change anything. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then I saw his jaw work the same way. His mother's jaw worked when she was trying not to cry and was losing the battle. He reached across the table and put his hand on mine, and I held on to it, and we just sat there for a while in my kitchen in Avondale, with the November wind coming up outside, and the overhead light making the room feel warm the way kitchen lights do when it matters. We talked for 3 hours that night, about his mother, about what I'd built and why and how, and the long road of early mornings and late evenings that it took, about Serena, about what the two of them would need to figure out between themselves, about the roses in the garden, about the F-150 which Darius has been after me to replace for 2 years, and which I told him, same as always, still has plenty of years left. And I thought about Barrett Holloway Voss somewhere in Upper Arlington that evening, sitting with whatever version of events had made its way back to him. I thought about Serena sitting with the full shape of what she had not known. I thought about all of it for about 30 seconds, and then I let it go. Because here is what I know, and what I have known for a long time. The men in this country who build quietly, who serve their families without announcements, who show up and keep showing up, the ones whose trucks are old and whose boots have been resoled, and who wave to their neighbors and coach the kids and sit in the back pew, and never once hand you a business card. Those men are not invisible because they failed. They are invisible because they chose to be. Because they understood something that a certain kind of loud, credential-presenting, Asheville-mentioning person does not understand. That the point was never to be seen. The point was to build something that lasts. If you are one of those people, please keep going. The noise will tell you that quiet is losing. The noise is wrong. Quiet is the longest game there is. And the ones who play it, they almost always outlast the room. And if you have someone like that in your life, a father, a grandfather, a mentor, a neighbor, an uncle who waves from his driveway in an old truck, please reach out to them, today if you can. Tell them you see what they built. Tell them it mattered, because they will not tell you it mattered to hear it. They never do, but it does. My name is Walter Greer. I live in Avondale, Cincinnati, in a house with a covered porch where I drink my coffee at 5:45 every morning. I drive a truck with 214,000 miles on it. I have been in every boardroom you can imagine, and I have never once needed a single one of them to know who I was. That's always been enough for me.